Hi, welcome to the April 2021 Southeastern RAC meeting. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and being involved with the public process as it pertains to the management of wildlife within our state. Really quickly, I want to read a comment. Due to the continued presence of COVID-19 in Utah and associated public health and safety, large public gatherings are still strongly discouraged by the CDC and many local health departments. Based on these risks and recommendations, the Division of Wildlife Resources and the chair of this public body has determined that Regional Advisory Council and Wildlife Board meetings will continue in a purely electronic format for the time being. Anyone wishing to comment on agenda items in future meetings and/or observe these meetings may do so by logging on to the division's website at www.wildlife.utah.gov/feedback.html, where instructions and links are provided. That being said, really quickly, I just want to note that we have a quorum here. We have board members that encompass Todd Thorne, Eric Luke, Scoot Flannery, Kent Johnson, Steve Duke, Kirk Player, Dana Truman, Darren Olson, Lynn Siderud, and myself, Trish Hadeen. We also have many division employees here to help with questions and comments as we move along. So I'm going to go ahead and start with approval of agenda and minutes. So do I have a motion on that?
Motion to approve.
Okay, so I have a motion by Kent Johnson. Do I have a second on that?
Dana can second.
Okay, thank you, Dana. I have a second by Dana Truman. And I will just quickly take a vote. So Todd, yes or no?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
And Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that passes unanimously. And you guys are on it. You're unmuting and quickly making a statement. Nice job. I'm impressed. All right, so now we move on to, so that passes unanimously. We move on to the Wildlife Board meeting update. And Chris Wood, our regional supervisor, is going to handle that. So Chris.
Yeah, there was a good evening, everyone. There was a Wildlife Board meeting on January 5th. I'll just go over some of the motions that were passed. One of the agenda items was the 2021 Landowner Association permit recommendations. That passed 5-1, with Wade Heaton declaring a conflict of interest and recusing himself from the vote. There was also an amendment to approve permit numbers recommended by the division for the Black Bear Rule amendments and recommendations, and that passed unanimously. Let's see here. And then the other thing that was discussed was quite a bit was having a work session, a board working session. And so that was scheduled for March, and that happened. It was just a working session, so there were no motions or any action items that were voted on. But I encourage everyone to log on to our DNR YouTube channel and watch that board session. You'll find a lot of great information about how recommendations are made and the science behind big game management and habitat projects that are going on in the States and all kinds of things. So it was a really good working session for the board and for the public to see. So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move into agenda item number 4, which is the regional update. And again, from Chris Wood, our regional supervisor here in the Southeast.
Yeah, good evening. We're doing a lot of really great things in the Southeastern region. I'll just go through each of our sections and tell you some highlights of what they're doing. Our aquatic section teamed up with Moab City a few weeks ago, and they treated the Moab Old City Park Pond, which is south of town. And it was a little pond in a park that was just full of carp and goldfish. And so we did a rotenone treatment with the city there. We lowered the water level pretty low, so there was no outlet water leaving the pond. And we did a rotenone treatment. and we removed all the fish that were in that pond, and it was 100% full of goldfish and carp. Maybe 98% full of goldfish and carp, but there's a lot of goldfish and carp. And so now we're working with the city of Moab to refill that pond and to stock it with some more desirable fish. We're also teaming up with Emery County in the next few weeks, and the Emery County Tourism Department is having a competition. We're going to tag a bunch of rainbow trouts from our hatchery and put them in Millsite, Joes Valley, and Huntington North. And then there's prizes that are associated with each of those tagged fish. So that'll be something fun to look forward to and get people excited about fishing. If they are already excited. Fishing is pretty hot right now, and people have been loving to fish during this last year. So our habitat section teamed up with our wildlife section and went down to near Bluff a few weeks ago to look for scaled quail. We transplanted scaled quail there a few years ago, and we wanted to see if the population is persisting. And they found evidence and tracks of scaled quail. They actually didn't find any birds, but they found tracks, so that was promising. They put up some cameras near some of the water developments, and we're hoping to go back later this fall and keep an eye out on that population of scaled quail. In 2 weeks from this week, April 27th and 28th, our habitat section will be building BDAs, the Beaver Dam Analogs, at our second water, which is here in Carbon County on our Gordon Creek Wildlife Management Area. And so these BDAs kind of resemble beaver dams. They improve riparian areas, raise the water table, and reduce erosion and allow riparian vegetation to thrive. And so we've been doing this quite a bit all over the state the last few years. We recently did some at Miller Creek over the last few years, and now we're moving to the second water drainage. Our habitat folks are also teaming up with our wildlife folks, and we do our spring utilization surveys and measurements. We go out on winter ranges and we assess browse utilization and deer and elk use of these winter ranges, and take measurements. This is a long-term transects that we run, and we get measurements and see what the trend over time is. Helps us get a good feel of what the winter browsing use and winter use is the last few months. Let's see here. We also, our habitat folks also met with the sportsman groups last week, and we're hopefully familiar with conservation permits and the money that is generated from those conservation permits. And so every year we meet with these groups, SFW, MDF, RMEF, there's a bunch of them, and they have money from their conservation permits, and they give it back to wildlife through research and through habitat projects. And last week they committed $3.1 million statewide to projects that we have here in Utah. And a little less than $500,000 of that will come to the Southeastern region. And we'll team up with our federal partners, BLM and Forest Service, and state lands and private landowners and other conservation groups, and do amazing work for wildlife. So that was exciting to see. We did have a turkey clinic on Friday. Walt Maldonado, who is our outreach specialist here in the Southeastern region, he gave a statewide turkey clinic. It's on YouTube as well. If you go to our agency YouTube page, you can see Walt give instruction on how to hunt turkeys. It's basically geared towards the beginner turkey hunter, which is who I am. And so I really appreciate his presentation. I thought it was very beneficial. So I encourage you to check that out. It's a little less than an hour long. So in less than an hour, you can get the basics of how to turkey hunt in Utah. We're also looking at a predator clinic in June, and then hopefully we're going to have a herp day in July. Herp meaning amphibians and reptiles. So more details on that to come. We're going to team up with the Forest Service later in May for their conservation days also. Our wildlife biologists have been really busy. They are doing spring deer classifications this time of year. They're also doing sage-grouse counts on Lex, and they're doing bald eagle nest counts, and bird surveys will be starting up pretty soon. And they're finishing up kit fox surveys and pinyon jay surveys. So they're out there busy counting animals and doing surveys. And then lastly, our law enforcement section, we do have a new lieutenant here in the Southeastern region. JD Abbott was promoted back in January, and he's been in our region for quite some time as our sergeant. And so he is now our lieutenant. So we're excited to have Lieutenant Abbott on board and in that role. Chuck Lawrence is an officer in Emery County. He is now a sergeant for the north part of the Southeastern region. I just will mention real quick, we have 3 outgoing RAC members. Their term is finished after the next meeting in May. And so we have 3 RAC vacancies right now, 2 agricultural vacancies and 1 sportsman vacancy. So if you know someone who would like to be on the Southeastern Region RAC, on our website, there's a place for people to nominate people. So we encourage you to check that out, and you can shoot me an email if you have any questions. I will also say that at our next RAC meeting in May, Trish, it's her last RAC meeting to be a chairwoman. And so she served there for a few years, and she still is going to have several more years on the RAC, I believe. But next meeting will be opening up the floor for nominations and votes on a new chairperson. And so be thinking about if you would like to be in that role, or who in our RAC should serve in that role. And we'll be taking nominations at that meeting then. So that's all I got. If you have any questions, the biologists are on and they can probably answer them for you.
That's awesome. Do we have any questions from the RAC? Okay, well, awkward silence. So we will move on to agenda item, thanks Chris, to agenda item number 5. Buck deer permit recommendations for 2021. Just so the public understands this process in a virtual manner, our division employees will give a presentation online, and then you can make a comment online, and we acknowledge those during the RAC. So Covy Jones, our big game coordinator, has already made a presentation. We have ingested all of those comments, and we are here to make decisions based on his presentation and those comments. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start with questions from the RAC at this time, if there's anything that kind of stands out to you. Yeah, sorry, Chris.
You're right.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yep, go for it. Chris is going to give our update from public comments. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, correct. So I've been asked to provide a synopsis of the public survey that we handed out after people watched the online presentation. So overall, we had 19 responses for the Southeastern Region RAC. For the buck deer permit recommendations, we had 16 responses. 35% strongly disagreed, 12% somewhat disagreed, 41% somewhat agreed, and 12% strongly agreed. I usually just stop it there, but I've been asked to maybe expand a little bit on some of the comments that we received. So you've all read these comments, but for those who may be watching, let me just talk about some of the things that were said in the comments section of this particular recommendation. And some of these comments, I'll just say, are based on rules and regulation, and they're more probably appropriate and something to consider for our November RAC. Today, we are on the agenda is permit recommendations, and so permit numbers and recommendations. So remember, keep that in mind as I go over some of these comments. We had 2 comments that talked about reducing the hunt duration. One person suggested a 5-day general season rifle hunt. We had 2 comments suggesting changes to the dedicated hunter program. They thought that dedicated hunters are wounding too many deer, and the dedicated hunter should harvest 1 deer every 3 years, and also raise dedicated hunter fees to $300. We had someone say we should increase buck deer permits, and we should also increase the size of the hunt units. We had someone suggest that deer hunters be allowed to harvest bears and cougars. We had 4 comments that talked about reducing the buck deer permits for multiple reasons. One person suggested we also reduce or limit out-of-state tags. We had a comment agreeing with the recommendations the DWR proposed, and some said they appreciate the response to the drought that DWR has considered as they made the recommendations. We had 2 comments about changing the unit to a 3-point or better unit. Livestock damage on range land was mentioned. Support for the coyote bounty program was also mentioned by 2 people. And then someone mentioned ending late season hunts. And then someone suggested closing units for a period of time to allow deer to grow and mature. There were comments specifically targeted towards certain units as well, specifically the Manti-San Rafael unit. There was a suggestion to split it into smaller units to address conservation needs. There was 2 comments that suggested we should reduce permits on the Manti unit. And then SFW proposed a 600 tag cut on the Manti to help with mule deer recovery. On the San Juan Abajo, they asked us not to increase buck tags this year. Another comment said to reduce permits. They think success rates are much higher due to muzzleloader technology and better scopes. On the LaSalle's, we had a comment that said that they did not agree with the increasing permits. We wanted more habitat work done on the LaSalle's, and that bear predation is negatively impacting deer populations. And someone said there's not enough bucks for the does. And then lastly, on the Chalk Creek, East Canyon and Morgan and South Ridge unit, they would like to see this divided into smaller units. We felt there's too many people on the public land. And that's a synopsis of the comments we received. So thanks, Trish.
Thank you. So at this time, it's time for us, for our RAC members to ask Covy any questions that might be outstanding. We're not going to get into comments or motions until you have clarification on anything that Covy might be able to give you at this point. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm curious where we got the population estimates for the San Juan and for the LaSalle units. If you look across the board, all the units statewide are generally right around staying static or declining slightly. And we show in the estimates dramatic increases that personally I don't see. I don't see it happening. You know, the San Juan, they're saying it had 9,400 in 2019, and in 2020, 11,000. I don't spend a lot of time there, so I can't speak to that, but going from 5,100 to 6,500 in a year on the LaSalle Mountains, I don't see that. And late season, especially this last winter, I spent a lot of time on the LaSalle's, on the winter range, and I'm not seeing that, and I was just wondering where those numbers came from.
Well, and Kent, I would love to answer all the questions, but the biologists get super excited. They train for this all year. It's like their marathons. So, and Dustin and Guy are here, and any questions that are region unit specific, they are the experts. So, Dustin, Guy, I'll defer that one to you.
All right. Yeah, Kent. And I don't know about training for it like a marathon, Covy, but we're happy to answer questions. If you look at the survival that we had on the LaSalle's, it's higher than it has been for a while last year, as well as our fawn production. We were at 53 fawns per 100 does this last classification session that we had. We had been in the 20s before that, so it was low. We did have quite a bump there to boost that up. And as far as dramatic, I wouldn't say it's a dramatic decrease. If you look back at 2016, we were at 7,100. And then in just a year after that, we went down to 5,300. So that took a lot bigger cut then. And then we've grown since those 2 or 3 years in fawn production. And like I said, our survival has been relatively pretty good on that unit. So, but we get those measurements from postseason counts that we go out and do when we do our classification.
And if Dustin, if you're okay, I think the thing that I'd add to it is just a model is just a calculator, Kent. So when it comes down to it, what we do is if you have good ratio data, and then you know your survival data, at the end of the day, the estimate's just like when you went out yesterday and I don't know, maybe you spent $10 out of your bank account and you checked it a little later and you had $90. Well, you had to have had $100 in order to make that work. So when we come back with ratio data, knowing what harvest was, knowing what survival is, then we can come back and say, okay, we had to have had at least this many animals on the landscape in order to make that ratio data work. Now, it's not always 100% right. And I've said this before about models. They're a good indicator of trend. And so the trend was down and then back up. And that's what we can tell. So if you hang your hat on the number, you know, you may get disappointed. But the trend is we trended up based on faundo ratios, adult survival, and fawn survival. And that's the only way that the buck-doe ratio makes sense. Is that accurate?
Okay.
Yep.
That-
That's good.
Hey, Covy, I have a follow-up question to that, if you don't mind. So you say that the models have, obviously they're not perfect. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. Is that the reason that recommendations are based off of the 3-year buck-to-doe ratio? Or why, I guess maybe the question should be, why is the 3-year ratio what we generally base the recommendations off of?
So, yeah, so that's more of a broad question. So I'll take it, Scoot. And it's not just the 3-year ratio, but the 3-year ratio helps smooth, right? So we all know that we have good classification years and classification years that aren't quite as good. This last winter, as open as it wasn't as good as some years are, right? But it's consistent, right? So sometimes when you look at 3 years data, you can smooth that. On the San Juan, I'm not familiar enough with their situation down there. Dustin would be better to answer that. But it was a more open winter for majority of the state, which makes classification more difficult and usually underestimates the number of bucks on the landscape. But that's up to Dustin whether or not. So we can use 3-year average in combination with last year's data and trend. And then we take into account also fawn production so we can know how many yearling bucks are coming into it. So in the old plan, Scoot, you're right. We focused a lot more on that 3-year average. And now we're looking at that along with trend and what bucks are actually coming in and available. We're more proactive now. So cuts are steeper, which also means that when we have the ability to increase, we can look at that more quickly as well. Dustin, I don't know how it was down there this year. Was it more open or?
It was open. It was an okay winter. It was we've had worse winters where it was more open and it was a lot more difficult. But and you're right. It gives us a good idea on the minimum of what we have for bucks there. But we did have good sample size on the San Juan this year. It was right around 1,600 deer that we sampled, so it was still pretty good. If you find those pockets of wintering deer, then you're doing good still.
Yeah, and 1,600 deer on a unit is a great sample. That's going to give you, that's a great sample. That's a really big sample. You aim. We always aim. You need at least 400 does. So that's a minimum. That's what we aim for. If you have 400 does, that's a really good sample. So Dustin apparently is above average as a biologist.
How many did you end up sampling on the LaSalle's then?
Give me 1 second. Let me pull that up.
Dustin, I show 515 on the LaSalle's.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
Is that total deer or does?
That probably would have been total deer.
Yeah, that was total.
Yeah, does was 294.
That's your last question, Ken. I got a couple. With regards to the San Juan, know that there's been some proposals by the public to not increase tags. Dustin, in your opinion, did you have a pretty good year classifying? As I look at that, I mean, the 3-year average is below the new adjusted buck to doe ratio. However, this year, the buck to doe ratio is at 20, and I can sympathize with the public's concern with not wanting to increase tags, but I do see a very likely potential that if we do increase or we don't increase tags and the buck to doe ratio is as high next year or even higher, the division is going to have to ask for a substantial increase in order to follow the deer management plan. So how do you feel? Obviously it's each year is a little different, but how do you feel about this year's classification?
No, this year I felt good about it. Like you say, it was at 20 this year, which is at the top end of our new management objective for it. And this one is kind of a tricky one where we did bump it up to the 18 and 20, and we were below before. You're exactly right, and that's why we went with 150, the smaller increase recommendation this cycle, just because based off of our survival, I mean, we had 90% survival, adult survival last year, 72 fawns. So it was quite high. And so just on those things, if they stayed high, you're exactly right. And the next year, without doing an increase this year, we might go double that even and have a bigger bump. So with doing the small increment, we could probably stay within the management criteria still without increasing a ton this year.
And Covy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fawn survival rate is probably one of the biggest factors in the model for projecting the following year's buck to doe ratios. Is that correct?
Eric, I'll always correct you when you're wrong, but it's on a general season unit. It can be a big driver. Yes. So when we talk limited entry, less so when we're managing for a higher buck doe ratio and more older age class bucks on the landscape. But in a general season unit, that fawn survival and fawn doe ratio, that combination can be a really big driver. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. One more question, jumping over to the manti. I know that our fawn survival rate has been low, even lower than I think was anticipated in the models the last couple of years. But my question maybe to Wade, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this. I know that the recommendations have come up in other meetings. If we were to go with the 600 tag cut that is proposed, would we still be staying within the management plan? Have you had a chance to look at that?
Eric, ask me that again, would you please?
So I'm kind of asking this a little bit backwards, but if we were to go with the 600 tag cut on the manti, would your model indicate that we would still be staying within the management plan? What I see is the recommendations are obviously within the plan, but to the higher end of the plan. And I'm curious if the 600 tag cut would out of the plan or just stay within the plan, but to the lower end of it.
Right. Yeah. So Brad can confirm this, but I think that's correct. That we would still be within within the our buck to doe ratio on that with that reduction. Is that right, Brad?
Yeah, both recommendations. Our recommendation of 8,100 would put us at the very bottom end of that, most likely, given the updated fawn survival. But the 600 permit cut proposed by SFW would also be within the management plan objectives. It'd be between 15 and 17 bucks per 100 does.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions at this time on buck deer permit recommendations? So if not, I'm going to move on to comments. Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
I apologize. I couldn't find my mute button for a
That's
second.
okay.
Maybe a question for Dustin. You know, I'm looking at that presentation by Covy, and it's talking about considerations, buck to doe ratio, adult and fawn survival on making decisions. Is this upcoming drought year, is it part of that equation? Because I know down here right now we are bone dry, and I suspect that we are going to have some issues down the road. I guess it's hard to predict, but I'm just wondering if that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, definitely is. For all species, it is. But that is part of the consideration as well.
I had one more question if we were done with that one. It's been brought up a couple times about we don't have enough bucks to actually cover the does. Can any of the biologists speak to research that's previously been done that we're using that would indicate what that level would be where you get so low on your buck to doe ratio that you're actually not getting coverage on those does? Because that always is one that kind of rears up.
Yeah, there's some there's a paper I read a while ago out of Colorado. It was a white paper, and the lower threshold is, and it's really, really low. You can verify some of this, but eight is like the high end of the low, and even down as low as 5. And as you creep up 5, 6, 7, 8, down in those numbers, you may start to miss some does. Anything above that, you're Kent, could you talk to about maybe the stuff on the Monroe and that as well?
Yeah, so we've never looked at the low end specifically in Utah. What we can say is that we've done VIT studies on a variety of units across the VITs are vaginal implant transmitters. We catch deer in March, we check for pregnancy. Overall, our pregnancy rates tend to run 95+%. So vast majority of these animals are pregnant. Potentially in the high drought year of 18, we had some indication of maybe some drought effects there. That's the only time we ever saw rates down. I think it was upper 90s statewide is what we measured. But that's so when we do that, we put in for when we want to study neonate survival and production, we'll put in a vaginal implant transmitter, and that tells us when these animals gave birth. So we've done that with nearly 500 animals on units from the Monroe, which is a general season unit. At the time, it was being managed for 15 to 17. And actually, when we started that study, it was down at like 11 or 12 bucks per 100 does. We've also done it on the Book Cliffs, north and south, so a limited entry unit, and the Cache, which is a general season managed at 15 to 17. And in no situation do we have any evidence of multiple birth pulses that would indicate does are being bred in their second estrus cycle. Everything was a very pronounced peak occurring in that mid to early June timeframe. And so we have zero evidence that there's does going unbred or being bred during a second estrus cycle. And that's on nearly 500 animals.
And there is another paper out of Colorado, the Bishop paper, that says that, and it was a good study. It's a good study. It says that in Colorado overall, when they increased from 20 to 25, they started to see competition from bucks that affected the number of fawns on the landscape and actually reduced it. Now, that's under a population that probably has some nutritional limitations, right? But they dropped increasing $5 per 100 does, they decreased overall on average about 7 fawns per 100 does. So if you're trying to optimize a population and optimize reproduction, too many bucks will reduce that, and that's pretty common. It's a biological concept. Anyway.
So any more questions at this time? Those are really great questions. You guys are asking really vital questions, I think, to understanding how these recommendations are made, or the current landscape, or the current climate. So,
Madam Chair, can I add one more thing? Is that okay?
you bet. Yep.
You know, that said, you always see interesting things on the landscape. We're out catching deer on the Book Cliffs, on the South Book Cliffs in December a few years ago. And this is a unit that at the time had buck-doe ratios approaching 40, right? Really high buck-doe ratios. And we're driving along, it's mid-December, and I came across a spotted fawn. You know, and so there's always those freak incidents. But as a whole, we haven't seen lower buck-doe ratios or have any evidence that we're running anywhere near any type of biological threshold that would create a second estrus or anything like that.
That's a great comment.
Covy, I have one quick question. This shouldn't take too much time. I know that one of the things that you guys factor in is the harvest rate, and it's usually taken off of surveys. And I'm not sure how large of a sample size those have, but has there been any discussion on making harvest reporting mandatory for general season deer?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the concern is always, Scuda, when we get into statistics and everything, the concern is always, if we make it mandatory, we could actually get worse data. And I don't think we need to go into that tonight. What I can say is that we are moving towards e-tagging. And when we finally get that computer programming done and get that on board, when you tag out electronically, we'll get the harvest data that way. And so, and I've said this before, give us a little time. I'm not sure exactly where we are in the process. We're making really good progress. And then COVID happened and it slowed us back down a bit. And in the near future, as many as a few years away, we should be e-tagging animals and get harvest surveys right there. And I hope to fix those concerns.
Okay, so at this time, let's go ahead and move on to comments. It seems thus far we've really just talked about general season buck deer. We haven't really talked about limited entry, and maybe there's really no concerns there, and I'm fine with that. We've talked about the LaSalle's. In my understanding, I think they're asking for an increase of 200. The Abajo San Juan, an increase of 150. The Manti wants to stay static, but I know that we have a recommendation on the table to lower that by 600. So any comments that you guys want to make? Or we can entertain motions.
Just one comment I have. I looked over this and the data. I'd like to commend the division on the decisions they made with the limited entry buck deer. I know that couldn't be easy, going down with so many tags and reducing it in the face of public pressure to not do so. So that was kudos to them. And then I looked at it on the LaSalle Mountains. I guess it's kind of more of a question for Dustin as a comment, but the increase of 200 permits, if that was reduced to 100 permits increase, would that bring us down into line with our 15 to 17 objective, or would it stay above where it is now?
Yeah, give me 1 second here, Kent.
I hope I stated that correct.
Yeah, I think you did. Looking at this, that was kind of the bounds to where we would be within that, and we would still be at the upper end of that 15 to 17 there. So if we went less than that based off of harvest success, would probably be out of that realm. Would still be above our, because we had what, 19 was last
Yeah,
year's,
19.
and then we had
3-year average.
17
It
the
was
2 years
22
before
last
that.
year.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's a 200 was kind of the bare minimum of where we'd need to be
so
to
yeah,
be
that's where
within
you got to be, just to go back to 17 on your average.
right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
With that in mind, and if there's no other comments, I would make a
Kent,
motion.
I do have a comment.
Okay,
before
go ahead, Eric.
Make a motion. With regard to the Manti, little background behind the recommendation to reduce those tags. We are right now, we're currently right in the middle, right at 16 on our buck to doe ratios. The recommendations that the biologists have given is a good recommendation. We're just if you look at where we're at with our fawn survival rate currently on the Wasatch Manti unit, we're at 58%. And that putting us right in line with previous years where we have ended the year. And even though we're through the steep part of that loss, we ended the year at 37 and 41% fawn survival. So it looks like it's going to be a pretty rough year for that. And so we're asking for that reduction just as a little bit of a more conservative approach to help with the lower fawn survival that we know we are seeing this year, and we also saw last year. It was, it started out really good at the time the recommendations were made, and it tailed off quite a bit more. So that's the biggest reason behind that increase, the decrease in tags for the Manti. Just want to.
Can I build on that for just a second?
Sure.
Now, I thought I just heard earlier that this has been presented at the other RACs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I believe so. I know it passed the Southern RAC last night unanimously.
That's what I was going to ask, is how those votes went, if they were proposed at other RACs. If anybody knows that.
The Southern RAC supported it. The Northern RAC discussed it, and someone made a motion as to support this recommendation, the recommendation of a slight reduction. The motion didn't get a second, and the Central RAC discussed it and didn't make any motions on it. So, but yep.
Okay.
And
you.
And I think honestly, Eric, when he laid that out there, Eric, you nailed it. Both are within. One is a little more liberal and recommendation of the divisions, and this is a little more conservative. Both are good recommendations.
So
Thanks,
Eric,
Covy.
that being said, do you want to make a motion regarding that?
Yeah, I would make a motion that we reduce the number of buck tags on the Manti LaSalle from 8,100 to 7,500.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Eric Luke to reduce the amount of general season buck tags on the Manti LaSalle, right? Did I say that right? Did I say that right? Correct, Eric?
Yes.
Sorry. From 8,100 to 7,500, so a reduction of 600 permits. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
And so I have a second by Lynn Sitterud. Sorry, Lynn. So at this time, I'm going to take a vote. Todd, yay or nay?
Nay.
Eric,
Yes.
Scoot,
Yes.
Kent,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
and Lynn.
Yes.
Okay, so that passed 8-1. So at this time, do we want to entertain another motion for the remainder of the recommendations?
I would like to make a motion that we
Can we,
approve the remainder. What's that?
I'd like to comment on, before we approve the rest of it, I'd like to make a comment on another unit.
Okay.
It seems like there's been a lot of questions and discussion about the San Juan Abajo. I know that that's between that and the Manti that we just voted on. Those are a couple of the units that we also received the most public comments on. The biggest concerns that I see are we're basing this off of a 1-year spike in the buck-to-doe ratio. And I do realize that, yeah, we're up to 20, which is the top end of the 18 to 20. But I see that more as a spike rather than a trend. I would see a trend as something that, goes over a couple or 3 years, which I think that's the reason that we factor in the 3-year average. I wasn't concerned to begin with, but as I look into our drought conditions, talking to, Blanding City engineer yesterday, he was saying there's no water coming down our pipes. There's nothing coming into our reservoirs. That's a big concern that I have down here, and I think that's going to be a big factor. I also know that our fawn survival is similar to what Eric was talking about. We're at 58%, and it's following a downward trend in other problematic years. Hopefully it's not as bad as some. It's definitely not going to be as good as 15, 16, or 2019 or any of those. And for those reasons, I think it's more appropriate to let it keep the tags where we had them last year. And the more appropriate time to adjust that number to make that increase would be if next year we see a large increase in the buck-to-doe ratio. I mean, to be outside of the 3-year average of the 18 to 20, we would have to increase by 6 next year and go up to 26 deer to be over 20 in our 3-year average. And so I, in my opinion, an appropriate time to make that change would be after we have one more year to see if this is actually a trend or if it's just a spike. And I also think that would help address a lot of the public comments we've had regarding the San Juan Baja.
Okay, thanks, Scoot. Would you like to make a motion on that?
If nobody else.
Before you do, Scoot, before you do, I have a question for Dustin regarding that. I mean, Scoot makes a valid point where, 3-year average, we'd have to jump significantly. What would it do? I was hoping Lindy would be here today, and she's got her priorities straight. She's headed someplace better than these meetings. But I'm curious. I watched the Southern RAC this morning. I wasn't able to watch it live last night, but I watched it this morning. I don't know if Kent or anybody could tell me what current drawing odds, how many years does it take to draw a tag on the San Juan Bajos? And knowing that the number of applications go up each year, if the tags stay the same, what does that look like in, say, 4 or 5 years? Kent, do you have that information, or is that Lindy's game?
Go ahead. I don't have it off the top of my head. I can try and look it up quick, Eric, but it will take me several minutes to find it if I can.
Okay, and the reason that I asked that question, there were some pretty good comments regarding some of the units in the southern region, and basically, with the number of applicants going up and a reduction of tags, you're going from once every 4 or 5 years to draw a general season permit to once every 8 to 10 years. And so, that's something that I don't know if the public recognizes that, but that is something definitely that I think should be considered. I think, we certainly would have means because of the 3-year average to leave the tags where they are, but I would be curious to see how that changes the drawing odds for that unit.
Eric, I just was looking up. It looks like last year's rifle hunt was 1 and 1.2, so surprisingly good.
Yeah, and we're talking about 150 tags, so I don't know if that would manipulate that statistic that much.
Yeah, and it may not, but it was interesting how much, I don't know if anybody else watched the Southern RAC, but it wasn't a large number of tags increase on those, but it made a pretty significant difference, but it may not in this case, so.
I looked at archery and muzzleloader real fast too. They're all 1 and 1.2, so it's all pretty good odds of drawing compared to some of our southern units, which can be 1 and 5, 1 and 6. Obviously, cutting tags when you're only dealing with 1,000, or I don't know what the rec is off the top of my head, but you're only dealing with some. It's going to make that harder. And this year, I'm sure it would be a lot harder than it was. I'm looking at the 2020 draw odds, so I'm sure they'll get harder as we get more applicants every year, and that trend will keep continuing, unfortunately.
And if I could mention something too, sorry, but another thing to look at in those draw odds is this just changed to 18 to 20. A lot more people are going to be putting in for that instead of the 15 to 17. So it will increase on your odds.
And I think what Eric is talking about too is just a good thing for us to keep in mind, like on a broad scale of that every action has consequences. I'm not, this is the RAC's decision. We weighed in and Scoot had some really good points about looking at data over time. And I understand those sentiments completely. And I think just overall, we just need to keep in mind that when we, of what we're asking for, right? And when you start talking about, I always hear, I'm willing to wait a year, to get a tag if it means a little better buck. Well, are you willing to wait 9? No, and that's a different story. And we're going to manage to the plan, and that has consequences when we have fewer deer on the landscape.
Okay, so that being said, Scoot, would you like to make a motion, or do we want to move on to the remainder of the recommendations?
So I would like to. I've thought about a lot of these comments that come up. That I would imagine there are a few people out there that see an 18 to 20 and think, okay, I'm going to put in for that unit. But I would hope that anybody that goes that deep into their research also realizes that a lot of these bucks are probably CWMU bucks that are not getting counted on the CWMU because that's not where they rut. That's not where they are when they're getting counted. And so they're not necessarily huntable during the times that those hunts occur. I don't want to drag this on forever, so I'm not against increasing tags when it's appropriate. I just think that the more appropriate time would be a year from now. If it still trends towards increasing, I think that would be the appropriate time. And so for the time being, I would like to make the motion that we leave the tag numbers alone on the San Juan Bajo at 1,050.
Okay, so I have a motion by Scoot Flannery to leave general season buck deer permits static on the San Juan Abajo Mountains. Is that correct, Scoot? Okay, and do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Steve. All right, so I'm going to take a quick, and Todd,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Scoot,
Yes.
Kent,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Dana,
No.
and Darren,
Yes.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, and it looks like that passed 8-1. So at this point, do I have a recommendation on the remainder of the divisions, or sorry, a motion on the remainder of the division's recommendations?
I'll make a motion that we accept the remaining recommendations as presented.
Okay, so I have a motion by Eric Luke to accept the remainder of the recommendations as presented. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
And a second by Kent. So Todd,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Scoot,
Yes.
Kent,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
and Lynn.
Yes.
Okay, and that passed unanimously. So at this point, we're going to move on to agenda item number 6, bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations for 2021. Again, Covy is here to answer our questions, but we will start with Chris Wood giving the update on comments that came from the public.
Yes, we had 9 respondents to this topic. 10% strongly disagreed, 50% somewhat disagreed, 20% were neutral, 0% somewhat agreed, and 20% agreed. Some of the comments were that they supported the proposed numbers. Another comment was that to not increase spike and any bull tags, and they support a later season date. Another comment was do not reduce archery tag numbers. Another comment was reduce late season tags. Also consider youth hunts on limited unit areas for management bulls. And then specifically talking about specific units, on the book cliffs, there was a comment that said eliminate the spike hunt. Spike hunt has ruined the backcountry elk hunt experience, and you can't have mature bull elk and spike elk both. And there was doubts on the average age of elk on the road and roadless areas. They doubted that was accurate or not. On the Nebo units, they said to review the age class reduction. On the Manti unit, we had 4 comments. One was get rid of multi-season tag for elk to include all 3 seasons. And there was to have a multi-season tag change it to muzzleloader and rifle season only. Another person said there are too many tags and that crowding was an issue. And then we had a comment that said, get the early rifle hunt out of September. On the San Juan unit, we had a comment that said the spike hunt unit on the San Juan unit was a zoo. There were too many permits, and they shouldn't overlap with the bull hunt. Reduce the number of spike hunts or reduce the number of days. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much. So at this point, do I have questions for Covy and or the biologist about the bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations?
I have a question, Covy. I know that years ago there were several of the limited entry units that did not have a spike hunt. All of them do now, I believe. What I know the book list is a little bit of a unique unit, especially on the roadless area. It's really is the only backcountry hunt, so to speak, that type of an opportunity. I mean, there's some of the units are big enough that, you know, you can pack in, but there's so much access now because of ATVs and trails and stuff that this unit really is kind of only that only opportunity. What kind of a giant can of worms would it do to the entire state if we looked at doing away with that spike hunt on this unit?
Yeah, I think it would definitely, and I'm going to give this a statewide perspective. I think it would definitely start to pick away at other units in the state, and more importantly than that, if there's the spike hunt serves not just a recreational purpose and an opportunity to harvest meat, but it also serves a biological purpose, and especially in the book cliffs. I think the thing that we agree about, and the part of this that gets so frustrating, is that we just dumped a ton of money and effort and investment into the book cliffs to see what the problem was. You know, we just said, okay, let's sit down, look at this objectively, and find out what's going on here. And when it came down to it, it was pretty clear that the problem wasn't the removal of spikes. It was that we have more elk on the landscape than we have resources for. Now, whether that's because of drought or whether that's competition from other wildlife or livestock or a combination of everything, that's the issue. And so allowing bull-cow ratios to increase, or allowing to have more bulls on the landscape, especially in the book cliffs, could hurt that herd. Also, in addition to that, you'll see that we made a recommendation to remove, and this is later, but we made a recommendation to increase cow permits in the book cliffs, to start to work at getting that population at the appropriate level to where it's more productive. If the RAC's okay with it, I could go into a little bit of what we saw out there and some of the rationale. Madam Chair, is that okay?
Yeah, I think it is, because I mean, of all the, specifically looking at bull elk, but again, you're going to talk about antlerless later on. We have some fairly major reductions in bull elk permits in the book cliffs, and then obviously, like you said, an increase in antlerless, and I think it would be good for the general public to understand what's going on in the book cliffs.
Yeah. So the decrease in bull elk permits in the roadless it's simple. It's that we looked at all the areas around the state as far as age objectives go last year. And when we did, we said that we can't manage the roadless separately from the rest of the book cliffs without significant reductions in permit numbers. It's not large enough, and a lot of those elk are the same elk. It's big to us and backcountry to us, and an elk can be in the roadless, through the roadless, and out of the roadless in minutes, or a matter of hours. We can't manage that small portion of a unit at a different age objective. It just doesn't work. So that's the rationale behind the reduction in limited entry bull permits. Now, when we studied these elk out there, we've done VIT studies out there for the last 3 years, and Ken explained what that was. The first year we went out, it was severe drought. When we caught elk, pregnancy rates were in the 50 percentile. Half of the elk were pregnant, half of the elk weren't pregnant. And we started to ask ourselves a lot of questions. Well, next year, the following year, so 2 years ago, the book cliffs were wet. Things greened up, they looked good. The cows were in better condition, and pregnancy rates jumped back up to about 86%, which is what we see normally in elk across the state. So they jumped back up, high pregnancy rates. We hit drought again the following year, they dipped back down again. And the interesting thing is that none of the elk that were pregnant the previous year and were successful with having a calf were pregnant again this year. They just couldn't hit the body condition that they needed to carry another calf. And it's a resource issue. It's a health issue. It's a herd health issue. It's a number of elk issue. This was combined. This last year, we took teeth on the book cliffs to see, okay, this suggests this population is aging. It's less productive. We have older animals on the landscape. They're less with lower reproduction. The average cow harvested inside the roadless area was 10 years old. And the average cow harvested on the outside of the roadless area and the rest of it, they're 3 and 4 years older on average than anything else where we hunt cows across the state. So it's a stagnant population issue. And when you get a stagnant population issue and you try to hold on too tight, you just reinforce that it remains stagnant. The only way to rejuvenate a stagnant population is to apply pressure or increase resources. When I say apply pressure, I mean reduce numbers, reduce bulls, reduce cows, reduce numbers, push back down, reduce numbers to where you're below that nutritional threshold, and push that age class back, and then you get a more productive population. And the other option, which we always work on, is improving habitat. And you need Mother Nature on your side when you do that. So those are the issues in the book list. And if the data were there, I'm telling the RAC right now, I promise, if the data were there and it pointed at the spike hunt, that'd be the easiest fix in the world, because we could just stop it, right? That's within our power. And if that were the fix, we just make that decision now and stop it. The issue is that if we made that decision, we'd cut out a ton of opportunity and do something that wasn't as good for that population.
Covy,
That's long, Eric. I hope it answered the question.
Covy, can I ask one question to you?
Sure.
You're talking about not being enough feed there to take care of this elk and deer herds. One problem that I don't think has been brought up, and I don't know that what this group can do about it, but the public can put pressure on. But one of the reasons there's not enough feed in there for these elk, you could quit killing spikes and hunt more big bulls and more big deer in there if you could get rid of wild horses, wild cows, and buffalo.
Yeah, and you know, those are it all compounds. And so this last year we did a wild horse roundup in the book list, and in collaboration with a lot of other partners. I'm not going to take credit for that. The division worked hard, but a lot of people worked really, really hard to round those horses up. And we're working on those issues. We've hit the bison pretty hard in a lot of the book lists, and are working to manage that population appropriately as well. You're right though, Lynn. Sometimes we want it all, and we can't have it all, and so we have to work to optimize what we do have.
I mean, if I might make a comment, we have a working group that's working super hard up there that encompasses a lot of stakeholders that are at play, permittees, conservation organizations, the division. And so, they're working super hard to assess what's going on in the book list and try to attack it. So you need to know that, and the general public needs to know that a lot of people are working really hard up there.
One other question: is there data or evidence, Covy, to show that we're going to get an increase in elk if we kill back a bunch of cows? Or I guess kind of a part of that is my concern is we can't guarantee that the cows that are being killed aren't pregnant cows that we need to be having calves. I mean, I understand getting rid of the old dry cows that aren't doing anything for us but eating the feed, but it's not a guarantee. So is that is it data driven or proven that it will increase the herd?
Look, I'm gonna let Kent speak to this. He's the big game projects coordinator and has worked a lot on this. The short answer is yes, but I'm gonna let Kent answer it more detailed.
Yeah, Kent. So what we're dealing with is we might kill some pregnant cows, absolutely, but what we need to do is actually restructure that whole population. So what we have is poor condition, and we have old animals. So once an elk gets over 10 years old, they're less likely to be pregnant year after year, just based on age. You throw in old, poor condition on that, they become really less likely to be pregnant. So when we catch these animals, when we caught on the Wasatch, we're catching a lot of 3, 4-year-old, 7-year-old animals, and which are healthy cows. They can throw a calf every year. Those are like a unicorn on the book cliffs. We're catching 16, 18-year-olds. So we need to completely restructure this population, and we want that to be full of 8 to 10-year-old cows. And the only way to do that
You froze.
it's just their productivity that's not there.
Can
Yeah.
you start over? You said the only way to do that is, and then you cut out. So you led us up to a great point. The only way to do that is.
The only way to restructure this population is harvest, because these animals aren't dying on their own. Their survival is still extremely high. It's 94%, just like we see across the board. They're getting enough nutrients to live. They're just not getting it to be a productive animal. So yeah, we need to fundamentally restructure that population and make it younger so that they can grow calves every year and make it much more productive.
So Kent, at the end of the day, what we're doing is, it's a law of averages, right? Yes, with harvest, you may harvest a few young cows, but when we go out and caught from a helicopter, we didn't catch any young cows, because on average, the cows are older. And we showed that when we went out and harvested 100 cows, they were all old. If you on average are harvesting an animal that's 4 years older than any unit that we're harvesting elk on, your whole population structure is skewed. So you're going to do two things. You're going to create space for other animals, and you'll lower the age structure of this population. And number three, pray for a good fire, and then pray for rain and good habitat, because that'll work too. Or however. So we need rain, we need rain, we need good summer habitat, and we need to reduce the numbers out there.
Okay, so one other question. This looks like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we leave it alone the way it is, we could be heading for a population crash. Is that what I'm hearing from you as well? Maybe that's a question for Kent.
I think elk, because of their high survival, I don't think they'd crash per se. I think you would just see them continue to stagnate along like they are. We've never really seen a full crash, but we do see poor reproduction, and we do see lack. Yeah, just the fact that these animals live, they just don't go. And I think they just aged an elk out there that was 27 years old, which is extremely, but they're going to live to a long time regardless. And they're just kind of taking up space without being productive. And so it's a long-term I guess the biggest thing is this didn't happen overnight. This has been happening for, 20 plus years, maybe longer. It's just been slow, and it kind of created this, and we're not going to fix it overnight. But hopefully we can get it down to where we can get that production up and just start gradually getting a more productive herd out there.
So for my sake, I guess, can we close the loop? What is the division proposing? And I imagine it gets at this concern that you guys have been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, when we get to, we're proposing to leave the spike harvest as is. The board did shorten that hunt, and the time to do that's in November. We're proposing to leave the spike harvest, let folks hunt spikes and help there. And when we get to antlerless, there's an increase in antlerless permits out there as well. And we're still highly focused on habitat work, highly focused on other work in the book list. But it did happen over a long period of time, and it just, we built a lot of bulls for a long time. We had a lot of bulls, and then as this happened, they just started to dwindle and shrink, and then it starts to become noticeable, and everybody's like, holy cow, this is not good. And I just want to say that we all love the book cliffs. It's awesome. And everybody wants to be able to solve this problem. It's going to take some time.
Okay. So one last question. Have we learned anything, as the division learned anything out of what's going on with the book cliffs in order to maybe get out in front of this happening on any other units in the future? Have we learned enough to be able to get out in front of it?
Yeah, we've learned that we always have seen really consistent pregnancy rates in elk. And we've learned that with elk, maybe it warrants looking at other units periodically and looking at VIT studies and pregnancy rates, especially within these times of drought, to see what's going on. Also, we've learned that it might not be a bad idea to age cows through harvest. And those types of things, like if we age some cows and look at what our age structure looks like, and in combination with possibly a VIT study when we feel like we may have some issues, we can try to get out in front of this. Kent, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is the one unit in the state where we're managing at that upper limit pushing carrying capacity. We don't see that much in other units, but I think it shows quite well when you're trying to manage for too many animals, you can actually hurt yourself in the long run. And I think maybe we did that for a little bit there. So you just manage at appropriate levels and make sure those levels maintain healthy, robust population.
I have a couple of questions. With the restructuring, is, if we go in and we increase cow tags considerably, has the division considered, or is it a possibility to maybe transplant and supplement that herd to help shrink that time frame that it's going to take to make that restructure and be able to have some quality back? And then the second question is, how do we maintain a quality unit here? Because I do know that there's a lot of young bulls being taken off there, and so with it being the only backcountry, particularly the roadless area, a lot of people have put in for years and years and years to draw that tag, and they're sadly disappointed. I've heard comments, hunters from outfitters. So what's the division? I mean, what does that look like to maintain some quality and still manage, what we're talking about here?
Yeah, Eric, we would have to really, really cut into the cows and push that back to think about the transplanting idea. I'm not saying it's off the table by any means. And I understand the concept of if we could push that population back and get aggressive with cow hunts and then possibly move some younger age class animals. It's not a bad idea at all. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it though. We'd have to vet that with the regions and the regional biologists and have more discussions there. On the other one, there is something we can do, and that's just limit permits. We're under the age objective, and we're recommending decreases in permits. And it's one of the hard things. But when you want that quality and you don't have, you are nutritionally limited and struggling with reproduction, you've got to limit permits. The other part of this, when we say we want quality bulls on the landscape, is that's also driven by nutrition. You can have older age class bulls that aren't the animal that someone who's waited a long time would desire to harvest, and it's simply because that animal, the antler growth is a secondary growth characteristic, and it just didn't acquire the mass and the hunter that drew the permit would like.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I don't disagree with that. But we do know that the book list has the potential to produce very high quality trophy animals. It's not too many years ago, but it has dropped off steadily, and I don't know if it's how much of that is to do with nutrition, but certainly the quality has diminished.
It has, and Covy's right about the graze up there, and they brought that up. I guide on the Book Cliffs, and the feed is what there is really, really poor. The drought and the horses are a big factor, and also, I was one of the guys that cheered at the outset of planting bison up there, and now I'm realizing that may not have been even a wise decision. But now it's something we just have to deal with. But the feed is in very terrible condition up there. There are a lot of springs that are dried up completely. So the water's down. Traditional places where we were seeing elk where there was water, they're not there anymore. And the feed is really in really bad shape up there.
Okay, so I think at this time, it was a great discussion, and I think it's really important that the general public understands what's going on in the Book Cliffs. Let's take comments and/or let's entertain a motion about bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations.
I do have
a comment.
one more question. Oh,
So,
go ahead,
go
Eric. You go first.
Well, mine's a comment. If you got a question, go ahead, Ken.
Just one question. With regard to the permit numbers for pronghorn out here on these desert units in the southeast region, the San Rafael units, the Book Cliff South, and the Potash units, was there any real consideration given in looking at the condition of the grays on the landscape and the amount of water when that was considered with the numbers? I mean, right now the pronghorn, despite the drought, seem to be doing okay, but I know, from reading studies that they're kind of susceptible to crashing when water gets scarce or feed gets bad. Their populations are susceptible to crashing. Was that part of the consideration setting the permit numbers?
So Kent, this is Wade. So I recommend for the San Rafael and the San Rafael Desert. You're right about pronghorn being very susceptible to drought. On the desert, our numbers are pretty low already, and the recommendation there is actually fairly high at 15 permits. We manage for a 2 to 3 year old buck now, and right now the average age on our harvest was 3.6, so we're over age, and so I feel good about that. I guess if you're concerned about overall numbers, we would have doe hunts, and we have had doe hunts recently on the San Rafael North. We were pushing the objective, and is what happens is the pronghorn suck into the agricultural fields from Cleveland to Wellington, and we have a recommendation for 113 bucks, and that's a lot. However, our 3 year average age was 3.5 years old, and so we want to make sure we're reducing bucks. We're below objective, and so anyway, we just want to make sure that we're having some good harvests in the agricultural areas to remove the pressure off these landowners. So at least for the San Rafael units, I think we're okay this year. We surveyed the desert. We didn't survey. This was our off year to survey the north. But yeah, I feel good about the recommendation.
Madam Chair, can I add a comment to
that? Yes, Guy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that in regard to his question is that antelope pronghorn do kind of, go up and down dramatically based on moisture years that we have. And so what we see on some of these units, on most of our units in these dry years, is we see very, very low fawn numbers, sometimes in the single digits. And then we get good years and it jumps back up. And so right now, with the conditions that we have, we're on that downward end on most of the units where we've seen populations decline and really low fawn numbers.
I'd like to say something too. This is Joseph Christensen. I'm the biologist over the Cisco Desert, that potash area out there. And this spring, we actually put a bunch of radio collars on our pronghorn on both sides of I-70 there. And we're real excited to see if we see movement that sticks right around some guzzlers or ponds, and see how they react out there during this drought.
Okay, so when do you expect to get that data back?
So they're GPS collars. So we're actively able to watch and see where they're located. But it'll just be watching them throughout the summer and what happens throughout the summer. If we get some rain, it'll change. If we don't get rain, we've been working with BLM and trying to figure out how to fill some of these guzzlers up during the summer when it's needed the absolute most. So we'll just have to watch throughout the summer, I think, and see how it goes.
Okay.
Okay, so are we done with questions? Can we move on to comments? So Eric, did you have a comment?
Yeah, it's not directly related to this agenda, but I think it's probably the appropriate time, because with the drastic change in limited entry permits, particularly on the cliff unit, there was some discussion last night at the Southern RAC, and I agree quite strongly with what they just talked about, and that is the timing of our applications. We're making people apply for their limited entry hunts that they've waited for years and years and years for, and they don't know how many tags that they're actually applying for. And then we have a unit such as the Book Cliffs this year that we have a drastic change, and there's no means for any of those people who put in for that unit to make any, modification or anything. So when we get to and I know it's not necessarily on the agenda, but I will when we get to the motion portion. I want to make a motion regarding this. Just ask the division to take a good look at it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so are there any other comments or can we start entertaining motions?
I have one comment, and maybe shouldn't make a motion pursuant to it. I don't know. But I think maybe it would be a good idea to increase the age objective on the Bitter Creek part of the Book Cliffs as well. Since the sentiment of the public and the wildlife board is to leave the roadless area at a 7.5 to 8 year old bull, maybe we could increase the rest of the Book Cliffs, at least during the interim, while we're trying to recover that herd a little bit, increase that age objective and reduce the number of tags there, not just this year, but maybe long term. I don't know, what would the division's ideas on that be, Covy?
Ken, I think if that's the direction the RAC wanted to go, my suggestion would be to ask the board to ask us to look into that. That's one of the things that is set in the plan, and so the appropriate motion would be we ask the board to evaluate the age objective for the Book Cliffs in the plan.
Okay, Trish, if that is appropriate this time, then I would make that motion. I'd like to make a motion that we ask the wildlife board to go over the age objective on the Bitter Creek unit and evaluate that
Okay.
going forward.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to have the Wildlife Board evaluate the elk age objective on Book Cliffs Bitter Creek. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, great. And I have a second by Eric Luke. So let's take a vote on that. Todd?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Dana?
No.
Darren?
Yes.
And Lynn?
Yes.
Thank you. So that passes 8-1. Are there any other sub motions before we look at the remainder of the recommendations?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion on what I talked about before. I'd like to make a motion that we ask the division, and I don't know that this needs to go even to the board. I guess it doesn't really matter if it goes to the board and the board asks them, or if we just ask the division to please take a serious look at the timing of the application period. I think really if we left it open for 2 more weeks, we wouldn't know final numbers, but at least the people applying would be able to see the proposed number of permits. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. And to me, putting, if I don't find out for 2 more weeks whether I drew a permit or not, that's not a big deal. It's not far enough into the scouting season that it's really going to make a difference. And I really think that the public would much rather see what they're putting in for. So my motion is just to ask the division to please take a look at this timing and see if it could be extended.
Okay, great. So I have a motion on the table by Eric Luke to ask the Wildlife Board and or the Division of Wildlife to evaluate the timing, the application period to align with proposed permit numbers, something in that realm, if that makes sense. And do I have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, and I have a second by Kent Johnson. So let's take a quick vote on that. Todd?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Yes.
Dana? Are you there, Dana? You're muted. Oh,
Her screen is frozen.
I know, you're frozen. Let me come back to you, Darren,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
and Dana. I don't know if I'm going to go ahead I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know, Chris, is it appropriate? We have a vote of 8. We can't get Dan on right now. Is it appropriate to move on?
I think so. We can get our vote. It's going to pass, so we can get our vote.
Okay, great. Okay, that sounds good. All right, at this point, do we have a motion on the table for the remainder of the recommendations?
I make a motion to approve the remainder of the division's recommendations for the permit numbers.
Okay, great. I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to approve the remainder of the bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations for 2021. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, great. I have a second by Todd. And Todd, what's your vote?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve? Oh, Steve, are you there? He's frozen also.
I'm there now. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Kirk?
Yes.
Dana? She might just be out right now. Darren?
Yes.
And Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so we have a vote of 8 To nothing. So we'll get her vote later on if that's okay, Chris.
Yep, that works.
Okay, cool. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 7, once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2021. We do have Riley here, Riley Peck, the once in a lifetime species coordinator, to answer questions for us as they arise. But Chris, right now, will you go ahead and give us your overview of public comment?
Yes, maybe before I begin that, I just got a text from Dana. Her computer shut down, so she's gonna be logged back on as soon as possible. But she wanted to qualify her no vote is because she thinks we should follow the 5-year plan. So not change it. I think that was referring to the previous motion. Is that correct?
I would maybe to increase the age objective. Maybe is that?
I think that's that's why she was qualifying her no vote on that one. So yeah.
Okay.
I'll have to ask her about this, her last vote. Okay, so once in a lifetime. We had 6 respondents, 17% strongly disagree, 17% somewhat disagree. There was 0 for neutral, 17% somewhat agree, and 50% strongly agree. And the only comment we had was they would like to see a unit in the state managed for a higher age objective for moose.
Okay. So at this point, do we have questions for the RAC from the RAC for Riley?
I do have one question with the bison on the Book Cliffs. Are we well below our objective on there for reducing the number of permits on the Bitter Creek South for the Hunter's Choice?
Yeah, so the permits for bison and reduction of that, a lot of the Covy popped on, and maybe you can provide some context for that. But it's not that we're below objective. Over the last couple of years, we've hunted them in different ways. We've had different hunts that have taken place in different structures, and we have moved bison into different areas onto the Book Cliffs. And I think that is part of the answer for why those permits are lower. And I think that the overall population structure in its entirety just leads to less permits for the Book Cliffs. But Covy, feel free. I saw that you popped on, and do you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, if that's okay, Riley, sure. Riley's right. But at the end of the day, what it's come down to is the Book Cliffs, the bison on the Book Cliffs Bitter Creek. We've hit them pretty hard outside of the roadless, really hard, and we've lowered the numbers outside of the roadless. And now we're working to focus on in the roadless. Now it's hard to apply a ton of permits in the roadless. If you give too many, you push bison out. And so trying to find the right balance of moving pressure back and forth is difficult. And if you don't draw a bison tag in the roadless, chances are you won't go in there to hunt one because it's much easier to harvest one outside. So at the end of the day, the answer is pretty simple. We've hunted them pretty hard the last couple of years, and there are fewer bison on the landscape right now outside the roadless.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question that goes along with that, especially, and I was going to get to the roadless and you've answered part of the question on that, is do we know how many of the tribal bison are moving in and out of the roadless?
What day is it?
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought you'd say. So, okay. But I was just wondering if that's being tracked or. So that's part of the reason for the increased tags in the roadless area as well as when I've seen that, the pressure in the roadless area, a lot of those bison in there, they do leave and go over onto the tribal land. They drop across West Willow and head over onto Mormon Ridge in that country.
Yeah, and Kent, for the last couple of years, we've put roughly 10 collars out on the Book Cliffs on bison, and certainly some go into the tribe. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it is something we're tracking through collaring efforts and maintaining the number of collars out there, as well as through the surveys that we do on a 3-year rotation.
Okay.
Yeah. They are similar to elk, even only worse. They are very sensitive to pressure. So it's this game of harvesting the right animals, applying the right pressure in the right areas. And it's still a young bison population relatively in the book list. We haven't had them there for a long time. And so we just started to hunt them a little harder, ramp up permits, and we start to see what they start to do, right? We know more of what they're going to do on the Henrys. And in the book list, we're learning how they behave.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions for Riley or Covy or Kent?
I have a question for Riley, maybe Wade, regarding the bison on the Henrys, particularly the archery hunt. I know that the numbers are high for permits this year. There's a significant demand to bring the herd down because of the drought conditions. With the archery permit or that archery hunt, we've cut those permits significantly before, and I know that it's been moved to that later date with anticipation that success rates will be very low. I guess not knowing that, I can understand why we've cut the tags back some, because we don't know if that success rate is going to be abysmal or, pretty good. So, but I do think that because I think everyone pretty much feels the same, that it will be very low success rates. And therefore, I think that there is some opportunity. So, Wade, how would you feel about increasing the archery tags on the Henrys, at least a couple, maybe, I don't know. What number would you have any objection to raising those tags a little bit?
So no, the recommendation from the Southern RAC was to raise 2 permits, and so that's not going to have a huge impact. I think if the recommendation was to raise further, we would want to recommend that we deduct some from the other hunter's choice hunts. The reason the bison population at 290 is the lowest we've been in a long time, over a decade, and as a result of the drought, we came in at that low level with a good solid recommendation, and so because of the genetics of this bison herd, it's at least most everybody knows on the RAC that there's no cattle integration. Genetic integration has been found on the Henrys. It's one of the only herds that, with Yellowstone and a couple others, that's a pure herd. And so right now our numbers are low, and even at the numbers we are losing genetic heterozygosity, and so we want to maintain our numbers as much as possible, and we have to take in consideration this drought, and so we really don't want to go down any further on our recommendation. So hopefully that answers your question, or if you have another, I'll be glad to clarify anything.
No, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so do we have any more questions for once in a lifetime permit recommendations? If not, we can move into the comment period and or motions.
I do have a comment regarding that bison herd on the Henrys. Wade hit the nail on the head. It is one of the only pure herds. I know that there's a tremendous amount of opposition from cattlemen. It's their livelihood. I understand their concerns, but that herd separates Utah. I think it's vital to Utah, to our hunting heritage. So I really, I appreciate Wade's concern about taking it down too far. I feel like there's been a lot of work done by sportsmen's groups that cattlemen have benefited from. And so I'm again, I understand their concerns, but I do think that there is a little bit of opportunity there without too big of a consequence on the herd that we could look at a little bit more opportunity with that late archery hunt. Just anything we can do to provide some opportunity and help the point creep in the limited entry system, I think is anything we can do that way is a good thing.
Okay, so Eric, they had it at 3. That was the 2020. They recommended 4. So did you want to make a motion on that?
Yeah, if we're to that point, if there's no other comments, I would make a motion that we increase the archery tags on the Henry, archery bison tags on the Henry Mountain from 4 to 6.
Okay, so
I have a comment on that motion real quick, if it's okay.
Sure.
I heard Wade saying if we increase that to a certain amount, that those tags are going to have to come out of the pool of other hunters, any weapon hunts. And the division had already made a commitment that none of the archery tags were going to come out of the pool of other tags on the once in a lifetime hunts. Is that commitment still in force? And if that's the case, then if that's going to have to take place, then we can't be trying to increase. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I think there's some clarification there, Kent. We don't pull those out of the other weapon types, and Wade's comment was a few more would be okay, and I think by a few, Wade, you probably meant 2. Is that correct? But if we got above 2, which would be 6 permits, then he would start to worry about overall harvest, and then at that point we'd have to say, well, if we're going to add here, we'd have to take away here. So I hope that provides some clarity.
And I
think
that's
this exactly the clarity.
Sorry, Kent, this is Guy. I was just going to say, I think too, what Wade's looking at is next year, when we set these permit numbers, we look at the harvest so that we can get the harvest we need. And so that if we bump those archery permits up, and then next year we have to make a change in the total permits, we'll have to look at those archery permits again to see if they need adjustment as well. So I think that's what Wade was referring to.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I just don't want to make a recommendation out of the RAC that goes against something that the division made a commitment to the public on.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kent. And I guess my recommendation would be, only if we're not pulling tags from other places. And that was my understanding, what Wade said, that they would be okay with a couple of tags without pulling those other tags, or lowering their recommendations for the other tags. I get, not that they're pulling tags from there, but changing their recommendations. So that would be the basis of my recommendation. And I do agree, because we just moved that hunt this is the first year that it's back that late. We don't know what the success rate's going to be. We anticipate it'll be low, but we don't know that. So I wouldn't want to increase it too much anyway until we have a chance to see what that's actually going to be.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table by Eric Luke to increase the recommended 4 permits by the division for the Henry Mountain archery hunt to 6. Do I have a second on that?
I'll go ahead and second it.
Okay, so I have a second by Kent. Any more discussion before we take a vote? And sorry, I've been failing to do that this evening. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take a vote. Todd?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Eric, or excuse me, Steve?
No.
Kirk?
Yes.
Anna?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me? I'm on my phone.
Yes,
now.
I can hear you. Yeah.
I was going to vote no because I'd like to see one more year of the data before we increase tags.
Sounds good. Darren?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay. That does pass 7-2. Do I have any more motions for the remainder of the once in a lifetime permit recommendations?
Trish, I'm kind of out of order here, but I just thought of one question that I had, and it's pertaining to this once in a lifetime. Is that all right if I?
Sure. Yeah, but in the future, let's kind of stay on track just to keep moving along. Go ahead.
So my question, Covy, is I know we did see a few comments regarding the out of state or non-resident permits, and I know there are a lot of units where we have less than 10. I mean, it's 10%, but there's a lot of units where we have 3 and 4 resident permits, but we give a permit to non-residents. How, obviously that's much more than 10% now because of the low numbers. Is there any thoughts or consideration that maybe we take those and give those back to the residents? What's the thoughts there?
Yeah, Eric, we do round, you know, when we round up, we say 10%. It's really easy on big numbers. On small numbers, it starts to get a little more tricky. I guess I give the big perspective here, and the big perspective is a lot of us like to hunt, and we don't get enough hunting here in Utah, and so we like to hunt in other states. And we're not the most liberal state for out of state, and we're not the most conservative. We're somewhere right in the middle. We're kind of in a good spot. You know, when I talk to the Colorado commissioners, and they kind of shame us a little bit and say, hey, you know, we give a lot of out of state permits, and Utah needs to step up its game. And then you see other states that are a little more conservative. And the truth is, I don't want to get so conservative that it becomes this cycle where you can't, you know, if we get so conservative and start to take away that opportunity, other states will too. And so playing nice with other states is really, really important. And it's important to a lot of our sportsmen. I think we're in a good spot where we're not super liberal. We're not the most conservative. We're right there in the middle. And at times it means we give a permit to a non-resident, but the majority of our permits, if you look at the overall average, you know, we give 90% of the permits to our residents, and we look out for them first. Kent, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk to the specifics. When, you know, what we do when we set non-residents in the fall, we do it under an anticipation of giving so many permits. So if we think we're going to give 5 permits, we will in the fall note in the guidebook that we will have a non-resident, and then that would be 4 resident, 1 non-resident. Sometimes we actually offer a lot fewer tags, and say roadless, for example, roadless, bookless elk. That's why you're going to see it as 1 resident, 1 non-resident. So sometimes it gets really out of whack like that, and then we have to, if we say we're going to issue that permit in the fall, we have no choice but to issue that permit in the spring, even if it doesn't meet that percentage category. So we'll fix it next year, but sometimes you will see it, and we do the best we can at predicting what that will be. Sometimes we miss.
That's a good point, Kim.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are in the place of just the remainder of the permit recommendations for once in a lifetime. So do I have a motion for the remainder of those recommendations?
Motion to approve the remainder of the division's recommendations for once in a lifetime permits.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to accept the remainder of the once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2021. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that, Darren.
Okay, thank you, Darren. I have a second by Darren. Is there any more discussion before we take a vote? All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a vote. Todd?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, good, and that passed unanimously. So at this point, we're going to move on to antlerless permit recommendations for 2021. Again, we have Covy here to answer our questions. Kent's here also. Chris, do you want to give us an update on public comment?
Yeah, let me just jump back one item. Dana got kicked off her computer.
Okay.
Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, but you voted yes in favor of that last motion that Eric Lukes proposed about having the board look at the timing of the application period. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was on right when it was calling, and then my computer mandatory shut down. So.
Okay, so Aaron, that passed unanimously then.
Okay, cool.
So, Antlerless. We had 7 respondents, 14% strongly disagreed, 14% somewhat disagreed, 14% were neutral, 14% somewhat agreed, and 43% strongly agreed. Here are a few comments that were shared. They said DWR should work with private landowners to increase access for the public on the private lands only hunts. Someone said cow hunts, we should stop the cow hunts on the manti so the herd can recover and reduce the private land tags by 20%. We had 2 comments supporting the division's recommendations. We had a comment that said increase antlerless permits in Monticello and establish a hunt in Moab. And one person said we need to do more on CWMUs to push the cow elk back onto public lands. And then someone said we need to keep looking for ways to transplant deer.
Okay, thanks. So, we've had a really pretty, just, I don't know what you call that, just lively discussion regarding the book clips and those antlerless permits. I think we hopefully have a pretty good understanding where that increase came from. Do we have any other questions for Covy or Kent at this time from the RAC?
I have a question real quick. This LaSalle Mountains North new hunt for antlerless, what's the boundary of that? What would that entail? Is that like the I-70 down to the Colorado River on the desert, or what is that?
No, so we had the Taylor Flat hunt last year or 2 years ago. I think we incorporated that. So what we did was took that hunt boundary, which was just the road going to Gateway, Colorado.
Yeah.
And we extended that up north, off to the ends of Polar Mesa and that, up towards the Dolores River. It's just south of the river.
Okay.
Is where it goes to.
Okay. So All right, I guess I understand that now.
So,
And
so do you want some of the reasoning
yeah,
behind that?
that's
So what it is we're over objective on that unit. We just flew it this winter, and most of the problems that we have with being over objective is on that north end, and it's largely due to Colorado, the elk moving off into the winter range into Colorado, and then the private property on that north end also. And so that's where we're trying to focus our harvest, is on that north end. And so by altering that boundary further north, and we have the later season hunt, we can try to get some of that harvest when they go on to North Beaver, South Beaver, Polar Mesa, those areas.
okay. I guess this is much comment as question, but on that area, once people start hitting them elk, they move on to Taylor's property and stay. They don't get bothered there, so that's where they go. Or into
Yeah, and
Colorado, one or the other.
That's part of the problems we have there. So we're trying to do what we can to reduce the numbers there.
Have you thought about putting that hunt like even earlier, like an archery type for that, adding to archery and try to catch those elk while they're still up on the mountain?
Yeah, we haven't looked into earlier during August or September. Our success for archery usually isn't that high enough to really justify that. So, but we do have it during the spike elk season in the first part of October.
Okay. Well, what about the muzzleloader? Did you look at doing that during the muzzleloader deer hunt, the earlier time there, and just having some cow tags at the same time? The muzzleloaders are now in Utah just a single shot rifle, so
Yeah,
that
that's true.
Could be pretty effective.
It could be part of the other balancing factor in that is we didn't want to overcrowd also with deer hunters and then more elk hunters too, because it is a kind of a small area.
Okay, thanks.
Dustin, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe this answers the question, but if you draw that cow tag, I know it used to be, isn't it still such that you can hunt and fill that cow tag during a season like an archery hunt? If you have an archery tag for that area, can you not fill that late season tag during the archery hunt or the muzzleloader hunt if you have that tag?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's correct. If you have that deer tag and draw the elk tag, you can hunt that cow whenever you want to if you have the corresponding deer tag.
It's a great comment, Eric. Or question. Are there other questions regarding antlerless? Okay, do we have comments and or motions that we want to entertain?
I have a comment on the numbers of cow tags in the LaSalle Mountains. During Covy's presentation, he stated that part of the reason for going to such a dramatic increase in the number was because Colorado was implementing a hunt on their side of the border, and we wanted to give Utah hunters their first crack at the elk, so to speak. I have a concern with overkill if we do that. We take too many elk out of that herd and have a problem with killing too many of them, because I don't believe that just because we take first crack at them and kill a bunch of cows, the Colorado hunters are going to say, well, crap, the Utah guys shot them, I guess we'll go home. That's not going to be the case. I guess maybe we might want to wait a year and see what Colorado's late hunt does to that herd before we start killing too many of them.
And you're talking about the LaSalles, right, Kent?
Yes, I'm talking about the LaSalles.
Covy, if you've got something about that Colorado hunt to mention, but I would say that what we're concerned about mostly on the Colorado side is largely private property, and they don't allow any hunting on there. And so that's kind of been their safe haven there. So even the Colorado hunts that are going to occur, if they are, wouldn't necessarily affect that on that Hendricks property.
Okay, so do we want to move on, entertain a motion? Do you want to make a specific motion about that? I guess I'm not, for some reason, I'm not seeing those numbers on that specific hunt. Are you talking about specifically like the North LaSalle hunt?
Overall numbers.
Okay, so
I'm
they
trying
went,
to find them again.
so the
Overall, it was
overall
up to
numbers were,
600 total
right, it
cow
went from 5
tags
to
on the
6.
LaSalles.
Right, right.
And yeah, I would like to make a motion that we leave the permit numbers because, I mean, we're having an effect in reducing that herd size on the LaSalle Mountains. It is trending downward. I would make a motion that we leave the cow permit numbers capped at 500 on the LaSalle Mountains, the same as it was last year.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to leave the LaSalle antlerless permit static at 500. Do I have a second on that?
Can I ask a question before I second that or decide? I can't find those numbers. I've been looking here, and I know I've.
So I have the numbers. So the plan was 2,500. The population estimate post 2019 was 2,900. Population estimate post 2020 was 2,700. So they had 2020 antlerless permits were 500, and they're recommending 600. So it did trend
Okay.
down from 29 to 27.
And can I say something, Trish?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those numbers that you said include the Dolores Triangle. For some reason, they include those together. And so our actual objective on the LaSalles is 1,800 elk.
Okay.
This last survey that we had, our population estimate is at 2,150.
Okay. Okay.
And so we're looking at a 160 permit increase is what we were recommending.
But is it still trending down on the LaSalles? You know, the Dolores is Colorado's elk off of Pinyon Mesa.
Yeah, so we went down 50 elk from our last survey 2 years ago. So that's pretty stable. It's not enough to get us down where we need to be with what permit numbers we did have. That was why we increased our recommendation.
Okay, I was unaware that was lumped together with the Dolores herd that comes and winters out of Colorado. With that in mind, motion withdrawn.
Okay. Okay. And Chris, do I need to do anything with that as far as withdrawing that motion?
I think that's good.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So motion withdrawn. So let's look at the remainder of the antlerless permit recommendations. Can I entertain a motion?
I'll make one comment and then I'm going to make the motion.
Okay.
I'm going on a little bit of faith here. I've learned more listening to the logic and the biological data from the book Cliffs. So I am going to make a motion that we accept the division's recommendations with the antlerless permit numbers for 2021.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to accept the antlerless permit recommendations for 2021. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Eric. I have a second by Eric. Luke, do I have any more questions or comments before we vote?
I guess I just want to also echo what Kent said is that, what we've learned and the information that we have, it helps me understand the recommendations. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Dana. Darren, did you have a comment or question?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, Todd. Vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Eric,
Yes.
Scoot,
Yes.
Kent,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Anna,
Yes.
Darren,
Okay.
Yes.
Lynn.
Yes.
Okay, and that passed unanimously. All right, so at this point, we're going to move on to the 2021 CWMU Antlerless, or CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations. Chad Wilson is here to answer our questions when we get to that. But first, Chris, do you want to let us know what the public thinks?
Sure. We had 5 respondents. 20% strongly agree, 0% somewhat disagree, 20% neutral, 20% somewhat agree, and 40% strongly agree. And just one comment was abolish the CWMU program.
Okay, it's a strong comment. All right, so at this point, do you guys have any questions for Chad?
I have a quick question. I apologize if this doesn't really match what we're trying to look at today with the antlerless permits, but I do help with the CWMU, and I'm a little bit curious if the division has ever considered making it mandatory for them to do tooth age data on their animals that they harvest on CWMUs. A lot of the bulls that are on the units down here are coming off of the San Juans and coming onto the CWMUs, and a lot of the deer are older age deer. I'm just curious if that's ever been a part of the conversation.
Yeah, since I've been the coordinator, we haven't had those conversations. We for sure can have those conversations. From what I understand too, though, is if it is on a unit that requires tooth data, then I think we do take it. But like some of these general season units, then we haven't made that requirement.
In addition to that, Chad, a lot of these CWMUs, for their own management purposes, had these animals aged, and a lot of them have been super willing to share that data. So we get some of it. It might be interesting to just ask them cooperatively and collaboratively. I think if we asked, a lot of them would not have any kind of problem with it.
And I'll add something too, Chad and Covy. But so when I look at it overall, without CWMUs on our limited entry elk, we get a response rate of 66%. When we include the CWMUs, it's 64%. So it's slightly lower compliance than we get from our just general public hunters, but overall not too different.
Do I have other questions at this time?
I guess I would ask, would getting more tooth data be helpful, or is a 66 kind of response rate pretty good?
More is better, especially in some of these units with small numbers. The trickiest part, and this is just from talking with the general public side of things, just because you have a permit doesn't mean you harvested. So we don't know who to go after to get a tooth. If you don't submit a tooth, we don't know if you didn't submit one because you didn't do it or because you actually didn't kill an animal. And some people who did harvest but didn't send in a tooth or forgot to get it, they could just check no on the harvest reporting, and we could get all sorts of messy data out of it. So that's our biggest concern about making it mandatory or something. That said, when you're working with the CWMU who works with clients, I might be stepping on Chad here a little bit, but maybe it's a little easier to ask them to, hey, can you help us out with this and start getting our samples up. Certainly, maybe something Chad can speak to, but could potentially look into.
Yeah, thanks. I understand about data collection.
I just want to say on the comment on that is just being involved with that, it'd be so easy to collect that data. And also, that conversation you had about the Book Cliffs and that older age class of cows. I don't know if it's a cost prohibitive thing, but boy, I sure would love to see them do more and more of that, just for the sake of understanding the age of the animals on those units, and maybe what are resident and which ones are transferring in and out, and compared with the age of the animals on the unit. I'd be curious to see the age of the bulls killed on the Spring Creek Dodge unit versus, the limited entry unit. I'm just curious more than anything.
But I think we actually have those data and could provide it.
That's what I was going to say, Steve. If you want to look at that, we do have Spring Creek Dodge bull teeth data anyway, so we do have that.
Okay.
I think you're on mute.
You're muted, Steve.
Yeah, I'm actually tired of elk. I'd rather just see how old the deer are, but anyway, sorry.
Do we have any more questions at this time? Let's move into comments then. And if not, we can entertain a motion if we don't have any comments. You might be muted, Steve.
Yeah, sorry. I'm slow today.
That's okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the outline proposals.
Okay.
I'll second it, Kirk.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Steve Duke to go with the 2021 CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations, and I have a second by Kirk. Sorry, my brain's starting to dissolve also. Are there any questions and comments before we take a vote? All right, let's vote on that. So Todd?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
And Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, that passed unanimously. Thank you so much. And just really good questions you guys are asking. All right, so we're on to the last agenda item, conservation permit rule amendments. Justin Shannon is here. He's the wildlife section chief to answer our questions when we get there. But first, Chris, if you want to give us the overview of public comment.
Yeah, we had 5 respondents to this agenda item. 0% strongly agree, 14% somewhat disagree, 57% were neutral, 14% agree or somewhat agree, and 14% strongly agree, and there were no comments.
Okay. All right, so do you guys have questions for Justin? There's quite a bit in there. Are you all good with it? Okay, awkward silence.
I do have a question.
Okay, great.
Justin, how many dollars were put back into wildlife through the conservation permit program just last year?
So in the annual report that we had for the conservation permit program, it was about $5.5 million that was used for conservation. I know a couple of weeks ago we had a meeting so that was last fiscal year. The other day we met with the conservation organizations, and I think 3.1 million was committed on that day alone for conservation projects in Utah. So pretty big return.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the 3.1 million, I mean, that was committed right now, but typically doesn't that number grow throughout the year?
Yeah, because there's projects or things that can come up before that meeting and afterwards. That's kind of the big one that we have that looks at a lot of the habitat projects and captures and translocations and monitoring efforts and wildlife migration initiative and all those types of things. And so, yeah, like I said, that's when the bulk of it is spent. And then you're right, projects come up throughout the year that are really important to conservation organizations and really important to us. And it's nice to team up with them and do good things for wildlife and habitat.
It's a great question, Eric.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions for Justin? Do we have comments?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. You know, I know we get there's a few people out there in the public that really dislike the conservation permit. They want to see the tags go into the public draw, thinking that that's going to help the point creep. But seeing that the amount of money and the good things that are happening through this program is, you know, it's really good to see. I mean, the callers, all the information that we're getting now that we didn't have before, the things that it's enabling the division to do the studies, everything like that. If people could see the good that's coming from the program, I think there'd be a lot less people that had heartburn over it.
Oh, that's a great comment, Eric. Thank you.
I've got kind of a follow-up question to that. What Covy talked about earlier, how Utah stands compared to the other Western states as far as how we treat non-residents. Where do we stand on this? I mean, I think the general consensus that like I've felt and heard out there is that we're way heavy on these conservation tags. Is that real, or is that just kind of a thought out there?
No, great question, and I think it's real. I think we issue more of these conservation permits for than some of our neighboring states. I think most states will have like a governor's tag and different tags that they auction off, and in a more limited number than we do. But with the conservation permit rule that we have in place, it's every program has trade-offs. There are more permits in this, but with that said, you know, when you can put $5 million back into the dirt and try to help habitat and grow that base and that foundation, I think that's key, and it helps us to be able to grow and improve our populations. And I know right now people could look at that and say, but your deer herds are down, and it's true. Everybody that studies mule deer know that deer increase and they cycle, they peak and they valley. You know, and we all accept that for rabbits and other species, but sometimes for deer, we have a hard time wanting to accept that. But the one thing that this habitat efforts and all the things that we're trying to do is when deer hit those valleys, we're trying to make it so those valleys aren't so deep that it takes years and years to climb out of. And so, you know, that's the efforts with the habitat and the restoration and those types of projects. But to get to your question, yes, we do issue more permits than most of the neighboring states.
Justin, is it okay if I add something to that as well?
Only if it's beneficial.
All right,
I'm kidding, Covy. Go ahead.
It probably won't be. So no.
No, I think one of the things that I guess I would mention is that when we go and associate with our colleagues in other states, they are seriously jealous of the research projects we can do. They're seriously jealous of nobody in the nation has a habitat restoration program like this. And conservation permits and the funding from those paved the pathway for us to have the level of research we have, for us to have the level of habitat restoration we have. They can't do it. They don't, so yeah, you give in one place, but nobody has the programs that we have. It's pretty fun to see what we can do.
Yeah, and then kind of just a follow-up comment that I would have to that in this comment section is I mean, I think that's we spend a lot of time talking about number of tags and this and that and weapon types and all that. But really when it comes down to is if we want more, we need better habitat. And that's kind of what, you know, that's where rubber hits the road. And I know that we are heavy on that in this state. And so there has been some criticism that comes along with that. And that's why I think something like this is so important. I mean, there has been even years past criticism of even like corruption on how it's handled and whatever. So I think it's very important that the division's trying to stay out ahead of this, make sure everything's on the up and up. And so we can continue to get these funds to make better habitat and make a more productive landscape out there for everyone.
Okay, so at this point, do we want to entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the proposal, the rule amendment proposal as presented.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Eric Luke to accept the conservation permit rule amendments as proposed. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, great. And I have a second by Kent. Sorry about that. My brain just stopped. Any more questions or comments before we take a vote? All right, I'm going to take a vote. Todd?
Yes.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Kent?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, and that passes unanimously. So we are at the end of our agenda. Yeah, I just
Madam
want to
Chair?
say, yeah, go Lynn.
I would like to make one more recommendation. I know this isn't on the agenda, but it is pertaining to RAC meetings and upcoming RAC meetings. I kind of mentioned it just prior to the start of this meeting. But I would like to make a motion and ask the division, especially if we're going to be using this virtual agenda going forward. I think there's a lot of good things that can come from it. I do feel like currently we have lost a lot of the public interaction because of the format we've been forced to go to due to COVID. But I'd like to ask the division to look at some avenues to get that back through this virtual thing. I like the presentations happening beforehand where we can view them. I think that helps shorten the meetings. We all like shorter meetings. But at the same time, that's not what a RAC meeting is about, is being short. It's about, you know, a public process. And I just feel like we've lost some of that. So I think that through technology, even with this format right here, I believe that there's ways that, whether it be through the chat or be through an administrator who can mute and unmute, to give the public chance to interact during the meetings. I think that's it. Excuse me. I think that's important, and I'd like to ask the division to look at that moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Can
Yeah,
I speak to that, Trish?
yeah, that'd be great.
It's a great recommendation, Eric, and I assure you that we are looking into that. You can make the motion, and that's great. I've heard a few things. I'm not part of that team, but there is a team right now in our agency looking at how we move forward. And I've heard talks about a kind of a hybrid system of what we're doing now and the good things that we're doing now, but also integrating what we've done in the past as having an in-person meeting. And so I've heard things like broadcasting RAC meetings in person via YouTube so that people who can't make the meeting can video in and for that meeting and still participate. I've heard things like allowing the public to come in person and to give their comment. I think you'll see kind of a hybrid format moving forward. We can't do that until we're given permission by the governor and COVID numbers look better. I'm hoping, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I'm hoping by August we hit some form of herd immunity and we're able to meet in person again. But maybe I'm being optimistic. But definitely, as soon as measures lift due to COVID, we're looking at changing how we move forward. And I think you bring up some great points. I don't know, Justin, if you have anything to add to that, or if you're more involved than I am, but that's what I've heard.
I'm not, Chris, I'm not part of that committee either, but I know they're talking about learning from the public process that we have, and there's a lot of good things that have come out of it. I think we've had some efficiencies, and so regardless of what goes on with this motion, I think Chris and I will pass this along. So appreciate you bringing it up, Eric.
Eric, are you satisfied if I just make sure that I make a comment during the wildlife board, or do you want to actually make a motion? What do you want to do on that? I mean, again, I don't know if they can do a lot until the governor, you know what I mean? It's.
I guess the fact that they're looking into it, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I do feel like we've lost that public interaction and.
No, I understand. Right.
So,
yeah. I will make sure that I bring that up during the wildlife board meeting.
All right, that I'm satisfied with that.
Okay, cool. So if we have nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, I have a motion by Scoot. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Kirk. And okay, thank you, Kirk. And I have a second by Kirk. All right. So Todd.
Yes.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Scoot. Kent.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Kirk.
Yes.
Anna.
Yes.
Darren.
Yes.
And Lynn.
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Have a good evening. We are adjourned.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Great meeting.
Thanks.